Hello, BookTube. It's Friday. That's Friday Reads time on BookTube. I love watching Friday Reads videos. They are a very good chance for a lot of people to sort of put a depth marker in what the ongoing progress of their channel. What am I reading lately? What have I finished and liked? What am I going to read? And I wanted to do that too. I want to make a video about stuff that I'm going to be reading or rereading in August. This is some of the stuff that I will be uh, finally getting to. There's some new stuff that I haven't got to in the month, or that I'll be revisiting, depending. And the first one is a fresh read. I've had this, and I have just not got to it. This is by Sally Jacobs, and it's called Althea, the life of tennis champion Althea Gibson, who was phenomenal at the game, and also her story is phenomenal because she walked out of nowhere to stun the tennis world, and was the first black woman to do that. I think she was either the first or the second black woman to be featured on the cover of Time magazine or Sports Illustrated. She was a hit, an absolute hit, and had a genuine barrier breaker for racial equality in particularly the lily white sport of tennis. Long before Arthur Ashe. So this is a fascinating story just on paper. We'll see what Sally Jacobs does with it, but I'm already predisposed to it, so that'll be good. Then we have something. There's a bit of predisposition here. We don't need to get into the details of it, but this does sound interesting in a way. I'm sure it's going to annoy me. This is by Josh Cook, and it's called The Art of Libramancy. And the subtitle says Selling Books and Reading Books in the 21st Century. And I know what this is going to be. I know what Josh is going to write as a book. I know what this is going to be. At heart, I mean, it'll have all the requisite things about the joy of reading and, infinite magic and, a house without books is like a body without a soul, et cetera, et cetera. It'll have all of the usual name checks for the wonder of reading, but I'd be willing to bet this is going to be a screed against Amazon. And a sort of hymn of praise to indie bookstores. I think I remember the publicity material for this book saying that Amazon has wreaked havoc in the book-selling world, but indie bookstores managed to cling to corners of the business anyway, and that this should concern us all and whatnot. I don't know for sure. I will read the book and give it its fair try, but I want to point out here, just for the purposes of this video, that Amazon has put more books in more people's hands than anybody, anywhere, except maybe the U.S. military or the U.S. library system. But sure, do they do horrible business practices? Sure. Are they horrible people? Sure. But are they bad for reading? No, they aren't. Plain and simple. Are they bad for your indie bookstores? Bottom line, could be. I always hear that, and I heard it before about Barnes & Noble, and about Barnes & Noble, I heard it about Crocs and Breton. I always hear this complaint. It always seems to me that the indie bookstores that get creative or that have forged great bonds with their customer base, their neighborhood, don't go out of business. They do just fine. We shall see. We shall see. I certainly know a lot of test case examples of indie bookstores that do the exact opposite of that. I would spend a long time just counting them off. Indie bookstores that seem to treasure the idea of making you, the customer, feel unwelcome. There's one just up the street from me. I live up the street from a retail bookstore that even has a beagle on the premises. I wouldn't dream of doing business there. I wouldn't dream of it. They advertise what they're like. They broadcast that they don't want customers who look like me. They just don't, even though they do, even though they look like me. They have bought hook, line, and sinker into the current 21st century Twitter-spawned suite of bigotries that Twitter has given us the earlier, the blue version of Twitter, gave us the impression is now perfectly acceptable to say. White men can't write, that all white people are racist, that rape culture exists, that et cetera, that reading is an activity of social justice. It's not. Reading has no moral component at all. What you read does not in any way determine what you are, unless you're reading something forthrightly evil. And the way that the people who think this way get around that is to say anything I disagree with is forthrightly evil. No, that's not how it works. But I'm sure you know the kind of shop I'm talking about. You don't have to do more than just go by the window to know whether or not you would be welcome in the store, to know whether or not you would get a lecture about what you buy if you buy the wrong thing. Josh knows whereof he speaks. He knows about the indie book world. He should look at the beam in his own eye. Is what he should do. Is it possible that the indie bookstores that he is, I'm sure, going to praise in this book are doing harm to their own business as often as they do help to that business? Is that possible? Could be. But obviously I'm interested in the book, right? Because all of us are interested in bookstores. And I spent a long time working for the competition. I've also spent a long time reviewing indie books. So I've got a foot in each camp. We shall see what we shall see. Then we have a reread. This will be Paul Murray's book, The Bee Sting. This is longlisted for the Booker Prize. Of course, it won't win. It has no chance of winning. But that's only because literary prizes are completely corrupted now. They've been, as the phrase goes, they've been completely institutionally captured. So if you want to know who's going to get on the Booker shortlist and then who's going to win the Booker, you need to consult the Facebook biographies and the progressive stack of the writers, not the books. I haven't read everything on the long list, but I can almost guarantee that nothing on the long list is noticeably better written than this book. So if that's what the prize was about, this would be on the short list and might be a contender to win. But it won't. Absolutely won't. But I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Thought it was fantastic. Everybody liked Skippy Dies. But I thought this was so much closer to the follow-up to Skippy Dies. This was just so much going on here. I thought it was fantastic. Very much. I knew as soon as I read it. It was a long book, but I knew as soon as I read it I was going to want to reread it. Then we'll move to essays from fiction. We'll go to The Deadline by Jill Lepore. It's a group of essays of hers. They're essays only in the limited sense. These are going to be, unless I'm much mistaken, these are going to be deadline prose pieces. Do you have a meditation for the New York Times Magazine or, the TLS or something like that? That'll be collected in this book. But I love collections like that. Absolutely love it. And of course, I love this author. Absolutely love this author. So anything that she comes out, anything that has her name on it is going to be fine by me. Then we have, this is an author I don't love. I only mainly so-and-so like Stephen Milhauser. A lot of you probably like him. This is a collection of short stories called Disruptions. I think this is his first book in quite some time. I don't recall him being on the new book list for years. I imagine that these short stories have shown up in a lot of periodicals. Maybe I've seen them. I might have read one or two of them. I could swear that one of them at least appeared in the New Yorker. I would have read that one. It's always a little bit of a rough thing when when an author that you're not over the moon about comes out with a collection of short stories. That's like watching an annoying person try and fail 15 times to start the same reluctant engine. But I'll give it a try. I'll give it a try. Maybe I don't have many sharp memories of him as a writer of short works. Most of my memories of him are of slightly longer novels or novellas that I didn't think were all that successful. Maybe I'll fall in love with him as a short story writer. Then we have Anthony Ham. This is book The Last Lions of Africa. Certainly an arresting cover. And this will be a bit of a downer of a book, but this is an ecological study, a conservation study about saving wild African lions, saving them from extinction. That is totally impossible to do. But I'm sure that Anthony Ham will strike an optimistic note in the course of this book. Humans kill these things for a whole bunch of reasons. For meat, because there's nothing to eat. For quack medicine in China. And also for money. If you're living, at the outskirts of a village, you don't have any money at all. I mean, literally at all. You make $500 a year U.S. Well, the pelt and claws and heart of a full-grown African male lion, if you're connected with the right person, you could get $50,000 for that. That will win. That will absolutely win. Unless every African nation that has a sizable population of African lions puts a bounty out, sight unseen and without proof, on suspected poachers. I mean, right now, game wardens can kill poachers without warning, without due process. If we see you and you've got guns and we think you're a poacher, we can kill you. And every once in a while, you will read a very enheartening story about lions killing a poacher. They're nothing to mess around with. I know that, of course, while I will side with Anthony Ham that these magnificent creatures should be preserved. They can't be. They can't be. Their habitat is being encroached on by thousands of acres every single hour of every single day. And they're surrounded on all sides by desperately poor humans who would kill them and say nothing personal. You would kill the last one and say nothing personal. That happened with the American buffalo. But anyway, even though I think it's hopeless, I will certainly join in the author's. I'm sure he'll be offering a plea here to save these animals, and I will join in that plea, even though they are 800-pound killing machines who all hate me. I will still do that. It'll be a sobering thing. Books like that always are. And then this I meant to have read this one long since, and I haven't. I meant to be on my reread by now. This is by Rebecca Sachs, and it's called The Lover. And you know that the main character is cool because of the tobacco addiction, because cancer is really cool. So you know this is going to be a really cool cover about really cool people. And it's the story of a woman who has a tempestuous love affair with a man in the Israeli Defense Forces, who seems a little bit traumatized because he's just come back from, the latest invasion of Gaza. And I remember reading that line. I think I read that line in this book's promotional material and thinking, what on earth are you saying? What are you saying? Are you saying his latest invasion of Gaza? What does that mean? That means you firing rockets into apartment buildings. That's not an invasion. Or at least it's not a legitimate their side and our side invasion. It's a pogrom. You should feel conflicted about that. You should have all sorts of guilt demons in your head when you go to sleep at night, if that's what you do with yourself, instead of resigning, instead of refusing. But we will see. I don't know anything about this author, and I really don't know anything about... what I need to know is about this author's politics, because I feel almost 100% certain that the author's politics towards Israel and Gaza will enter this book, but maybe not. Maybe, in fact, the book will comment on those politics. That would be wonderful. Then we have a book. This is by Emily Habbock. This is called Shark Heart. And it is the story of a young couple. They're in love, and one of the couple gradually starts transforming into a shark. Not a shark-like person, but a shark. And it makes them more aggressive and more bitey and whatnot. I don't know what to think about this. It's very aggressively not being marketed as science fiction. I don't think I've even heard magical realism floated as a description of this book, which leads me to the usual thing. When I read about, a non-binary mountain lion, I automatically look for the fine print to see whether or not the author actually believes this sort of thing is possible. It could very well be. We are raising the most scientifically illiterate generation in the history of the world, including when people thought the world was flat. So it could very well be that the author thinks, well, what would happen if one of us started to turn into a great white shark? If that were the case, I would want to say very quietly, darling, that can't happen. Okay, you're a novelist. Okay, not an alchemist. But I could be just being grumpy. That's all. I tend to get grumpy about contemporary fiction. Certainly, this has the potential to be really interesting. I don't think that I'm going to be able to stop thinking of there's a cartoon in the latest issue of The New Yorker. It's not within reach, or I would grab it, that shows a shark in bed with a human. The shark is saying that if I don't keep kicking in my sleep, I die. To take off on the fact that if sharks don't keep swimming, if they don't keep water flowing over their gills, they drown. They die. And it's sort of a comment on one partner's always complaining that the other kicks in their sleep. If I don't keep kicking in my sleep, I'll die. I'm going to think about that cartoon so compulsively when it comes to this book that I think I'm probably going to cut out the cartoon and use it as a bookmark in my print copy of Shark Heart. Then we have, this is by Caleb Roerig, and this is Teach the Torches to Burn, a Romeo and Juliet remix. Bet you can guess the remix element here. This is, I seem to remember the publicity material here referring to the fact that these are canonical stories. This is a series of canonical stories rewritten in order to favor marginalized voices. Okay, I don't know how marginalized gay people are in the publishing industry or the entertainment industry or the news industry or a million other industries. I'm not sure how marginalized you are. I don't, I, one way or the other, I don't so much, in fact, I don't mind the remix at all. I am always up for a pastiche on Romeo and Juliet. I just worry with this book. I worry, as you can guess some of the things that I would worry about. I worry that the subtext of this book, or maybe that it'll be stated overtly, is that the original Romeo and Juliet, any idea of it, especially Shakespeare himself, were all evil because of their dangly bits, or who they slept with. I don't know that I don't know how you could get that inside the remix itself, but if anybody can do it, a writer in the 21st century can do it. I'm worried about that, and of course, I'm worried about the ending. Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy. Romeo and Juliet both die. Sorry, spoilers. Romeo and Juliet both die. But you cannot write a gay story in the 21st century in which either of the two characters dies. You can't do that. What's his name again? Caleb Roerig? If he were to write a remix of Romeo and Juliet in which it's two gay boys and they both die at the end, he would never work again in American publishing and might not live out the week. So I guess that raises the question of what is Romeo and Juliet without the tragedy? And that question, believe it or not, is very old. There have been retellings of the Romeo and Juliet story, not gay retellings, but there have been retellings of the Romeo and Juliet story for centuries in which one or both of them survive. So I think maybe I'll have those on the mind when I'm doing this, but I'm going to give it a try and we'll see. I seem to have some favorable association in my mind with the author, Caleb Roerig, and I can't figure out why that is. Usually when I feel that way, might as well let you gaze on the AI cover if I'm still talking about the book. Usually when I feel that way about an author, I will Google around to see if maybe I've written about them before or interviewed them or something like that. But nowadays, in the last 15 years, it could also be that I'm familiar with them from social media. Maybe I follow Caleb Roerig on Twitter or did follow him on Facebook or whatnot. I'll figure it out. I'll find it out. It doesn't matter one way or another. It's the book that counts, not him. Then we have an author I know and really love. This is Learned by Heart by Emma Donoghue. Very bright cover there and very contrasty light here. I think this is a historical fiction, story of a torrid lesbian love affair in the 19th century. It doesn't really matter to me at this point because this is an author who has so much credit in the Bank of Steve that I'll read anything that she writes and pay it serious attention. I really love this author. So I will pay any attention to anything that she does. And then we have, this is a historical novel. This is by the A.J. Pierce, who wrote Dear Mrs. Bird. Did any of you read that? I could swear that I saw it get its heyday on social media, maybe on BookTube, in the critical world just a bit. But I don't think I ever read Dear Mrs. Bird. And this is A.J. Pierce's new novel, Mrs. Porter Calling. A historical novel about a woman who has a very popular sort of write-in column for, I think, a magazine. And then a new editor comes in and wants to change everything, just everything, and wants to get rid of the column as well. And a whole bunch of plucky characters have to band together to save it. It's going to have a little bit of extra sting, of extra relevance for me, because that's the way the periodical writing world is. You'll be going fine for weeks at a time, months at a time, years at a time with some periodical, and then all of a sudden a new editor will come in, new owner will come in, and everything changes. There's no hard feelings, but we don't want you anymore. That happens all the time. It's a very rare exception when that doesn't happen. Everybody that writes for a living has stories like that. So a novel in which I've had to hold it at an angle like this because you can't see it in the contrasting light here. You've got typewriter keys though for the cover, which is kind of neat. A novel that makes a kind of romantic, quixotic adventure out of people stopping that from happening, people banding together to get the good old days back at the paper. That doesn't happen. So, but it's in a novel, so maybe it'll be fun to read that it does happen. Who knows? But I think that's it. That'd be effectively it anyway, because the lighting contrast is too bad here. We might finally be going to get a little cloudburst. It was promised all day at 90% chance and never happened. But you wouldn't have been able to see covers anyway, and that's the gist of it. I've got a bunch of other things to read for August. Of course, I plan on August being a very good reading month. But those are some of the things that are fairly new. I think a lot of these are August releases that I'll either be reading or rereading. So I'll wrap this up for now. For Friday Reads, I'd love to know what you're doing this weekend. Did you have a good reading week? Are you going to have, looking ahead to your weekend, are you going to have nice, juicy chunks of reading time? It's always a fun feeling for those of us who are sick enough to like that sort of thing. I'd love to hear about it. So feel free to tell me your own Friday Reads, whether you make videos or not. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.